With this video, we are continuing our discussion about factoring trinomials, and now we are dealing with trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And this general form is indicating that our trinomials will have a coefficient on x squared, we'll have a middle term of regular x, and the coefficient will be b, and our third term is the constant with no variable c. So here's our first example, 2x squared plus 7x plus 5. We want to see this coefficient on x squared, that 2 right there. This is the clue that when we see three terms and our leading term has a coefficient of 2 or any number bigger than 2, the following steps are required. This is one method. This is the method that I choose to use most of the time. So it's going to be about 4 basic steps. The first step is we want to multiply the first and the third coefficients. So we're going to multiply this 2 times 5 and get 10. That's step 1. Step 2 is finding a pair of numbers. It's a little bit similar to factoring those earlier trinomials, but there's also a difference involved. So we want to find a pair of numbers that multiplied together are going to equal that 10, the number we came up with in step 1. But added, we're still trying to come up with this middle term, positive 7. So we're looking for this pair of numbers. Multiplied together will equal 10. Added together will equal 7. And those numbers are 2 and 5. Here's a big difference from the other kind of factoring. Those numbers, we do not just drop them right into an answer. We're only halfway done with this type of factoring. So step 3 is split the middle term. We're going to look at our middle term, this 7x. We're going to split it up into 2 terms using these numbers that we found in step 2. So we're going to take out a 7x, and in its place, we're going to have a positive 2x and a positive 5x. So we used these numbers that we found, 2 and 5. They need to have x's in those terms because they are being split up from this positive 7x. We want to be able to look at those 2 terms and say, well, if I combined them, I'd get back to a 7x. So we're creating these 2 new terms, positive 2x and positive 5x. The first term and the last term, we're just bringing those right down. 2x squared to begin with and positive 5 at the end. Okay, we're at step 4, and think about what we said we do when we're looking at 4 terms and we're factoring. If you see 4 terms, you should do factor by grouping, and that's our last step. That's how we're finishing this problem up. So the first 3 steps, we weren't doing too much. If you look at this line right here, if we were to combine those like terms, we end up with what we started with. We haven't done too much to factor, but what we did do is we split this problem up in the perfect way so that we can do it with factor by grouping. So we'll cut this problem in half, look at the first pair of terms, and think of the GCF, the greatest common factor. We can divide out from each of these terms. We can take a 2, and we can take 1x, so we have that in front of parentheses. Inside parentheses, we need to have a positive x and a positive 1. Let's do the last pair of terms here. Our GCF is a positive 5, so we're bringing that out front. Inside parentheses, we'll need positive x and positive 1. Remember that now we need to see our quantities in parentheses. They need to match. So good that they do. X plus 1, that's going to be one of our factors. And the other factor made up from these 2 GCFs, the 2x and the positive 5. And that's how we're going to factor trinomials when our leading term has a coefficient that's 2 or greater. Let's go through those steps one more time with our next example, 2x squared plus 9x minus 5. So again, it's a trinomial, and our leading coefficient is a 2. So it's going to require 4 steps to factor this trinomial. The first step is we multiply the first and the third coefficients. So we're multiplying positive 2 times negative 5 to get this negative 10. There's step 1. Step 2, finding a pair of numbers that multiplied together will equal negative 10, and added together will give us the middle coefficient, positive 9. positive 10 and negative 1. That's the pair of numbers that are going to do what we need them to do. So third step is to split up that middle term, that positive 9x, into two terms using these numbers, positive 10x and negative 1x. And a quick check that if we combine those, it would equal positive 9x. So we're doing legitimate moves. We're going to bring down 2x squared and the negative 5. And the problem now is factor by grouping. So we'll pair up the first two terms. Find GCF, it's 2x. It's going out in front of parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we have positive x and positive 5. The last two terms, what I've done here is spotted that these two terms are both negative, and I need to end up with positive terms in parentheses. So it was a negative number that we needed to factor out for the GCF. But we didn't see really any numbers aside from a 1 that could be brought out. So it's a negative 1 that we are bringing out in front of parentheses as the GCF, so we can flip signs from this negative 1x to a positive 1x, and from a negative 5 to a positive 5. And that's how we're getting our quantities in parentheses to match up. And when they match, we can get to our answer. X plus 5 is one factor, and 2x minus 1 makes up the other factor. Okay, here's a problem for you to try. Think about, we see three terms, that we have a leading coefficient that's 2, and this problem will require those 4 steps to factor this trinomial. So pause the video, take a few minutes to work through this one, and then come back and we'll look at the answer. So for this problem, we needed to start off by multiply the first and third coefficients to give us 18. Next, the pair of numbers that multiplied together will equal 18, but added together will equal this middle coefficient, positive 9, and the pair is going to be a positive 3 and positive 6. So we're splitting the middle term up into two new terms using positive 6 and positive 3. I want to point out that it does not matter the order that we place in those two terms. So if you used a positive 3x first and then your positive 6x second, absolutely fine. We're going to see some differences in our factor by grouping, but we should see the same answer. So check this out and understand that the positive 6 and the positive 3, and anytime we're at this step with this pair of numbers, those two numbers can be placed inside here in either order. The order is not going to matter. Both ways, we're going to have something that's going to work when we try factor by grouping. From the first pair, we have a GCF, positive 2x, and inside parentheses, x plus 3. From this pair, in the rear, we have a GCF of 3. The 3 is out in front of parentheses with x plus 3 inside parentheses. We have our quantities in parentheses match. It's going to be our first factor. And the other factor made up of the GCFs that we found, 2x and positive 3.